She cooked for him every morning before the sun touched the roof of their small zinc house. She washed his school uniform with her bare hands, scrubbing the collar until the dirt surrendered. She sewed groundnuts by the roadside, her wrapper tied tight around her waist, sweat dripping down her face like rain on a window, all so her son could have a future. And he had one. Oh, he had one. But the day wealth entered his life, he forgot her name. Festus did not grow up with money. He grew up with love. The kind of love that patches old shoes with rubber bands and still tells you to walk with your head high. His mother, Flora, was the kind of woman who could turn nothing into something. A handful of flour, a little palm oil, a fire made from firewood she carried on her head from the market 3 streets away. She made magic with her hands every single day, and that magic had one name: Festus. From the time he was a small boy, Festus knew his mother's hands. He knew the roughness of them when she held his face. He knew how her palms smelled like smoke and onions after cooking. He knew the sound of her voice in the dark when the electricity went out and she would hum old songs to keep the fear away. Flora was not just his mother. She was his world, his compass, his first home. They lived in a rented room at the back of an old compound in the city. The landlord knocked on their door every first of the month with his chest puffed out and his eyes sharp like he was collecting his own life savings. Flora never let him see her sweat. She would hand him the money with a steady hand and a straight face, even on the days she had borrowed from 3 different neighbors just to put it together. Festus watched all of this. He absorbed it, and he told himself, silently, in the quiet of the room they shared, that one day he would take his mother out of that place. One day she would not have to bow her head before any landlord. One day she would wear good shoes, eat good food, and rest her tired hands. That promise was the fire that pushed him. He studied hard. He read by candlelight when others slept. He failed twice and tried 3 times. He moved from one hustle to the next, washing cars, helping at a printing press, doing delivery runs for a small business. And slowly, like a seed that refuses to die in dry ground, things began to grow. Then he met Thompson. Thompson was not the kind of man you forgot easily. He walked into a room like he owned it. Fine agbada, expensive shoes, phone that he never left his hand. He had connections, he had contracts, he had a way of talking that made ordinary men feel like they were already rich just by sitting near him. Thompson saw something in Festus, a hunger, a drive, a raw ambition that just needed the right fuel. He offered Festus a position in his company. Nothing big at first, just coordination work, running logistics, managing small accounts. But Festus was sharp. Within 1 year, he had moved from the bottom floor to a glass-walled office with his name on a small plate beside the door. Money started coming. Real money. And Festus felt something shift inside him. He moved out of the compound and into a proper apartment. He bought new clothes. He cut off the old friends who still smelled like the struggle he was running from. He changed his phone. He changed his number. And slowly, so slowly it almost looked accidental, he changed how often he called his mother. At first, it was once a week. Then once a month. Then barely at all. Flora would sit by her window in that same rented room, her wrapper on her lap, her eyes on the door, her ears waiting for the sound of her son's voice on the other end of a phone that rang less and less. When she called him, it would ring and ring. Sometimes he would pick, always in a hurry, always somewhere important, always just 5 minutes, and she would swallow the real thing she wanted to say and ask if he had eaten. Because that is what mothers do. They swallow their pain and ask if you have eaten. Neighbors whispered. They always whisper. They said they saw Festus driving a big car through the estate. They said he had a girlfriend from a wealthy family. They said he was doing well, very well. And when they said it to Flora, she would smile and say, "That is my son." But the smile never fully reached her eyes, because a mother always knows when she is losing her child, not to death, but to distance. And sometimes, distance is worse. The day that broke Flora's heart completely was not a dramatic day. There was no shouting, no door slam, no confrontation in the middle of the street. It was a Tuesday. Flora had fallen sick. Nothing too serious at first, just a fever that stayed too long, a cough that refused to leave. The neighbors took her to a clinic and the nurse said she needed medication and rest. Flora called Festus. She told him she was not feeling well. She told him she needed a little help, not a lot, just enough for medicine and food. Festus said, "Mama, I'm in a meeting. I will call you back." He never called back. Not that night, not the next morning, not that week. Flora lay on her mat, covered with that same old wrapper, her body burning with fever, and for the first time in her life, she cried not from pain, but from the realization that the son she had carried in her womb, fed from her own plate, fought for with every rough and calloused hand she owned, had left her behind. He had made it, and he had left her.
If you have ever watched a strong woman break, not the loud kind of breaking, not the kind with screaming and drama, but the quiet kind, where she just goes still inside, where the light behind her eyes dims slowly, like a lantern running out of oil, then you know what happened to Flora in the months that followed. She got better from the fever. Her body recovered, but something else inside her did not. She stopped waiting by the window. She stopped jumping when her phone rang. She stopped telling neighbors, "That is my son," with that painful borrowed pride. She simply became quiet. And in her community, when a woman like Flora goes quiet, people know it is serious, because women like Flora never stop talking, never stop praying, never stop hoping. Silence from such a woman is a wound that has gone too deep for noise. The rent was overdue again. The landlord came again. This time, Flora had nothing. She asked a neighbor, old Mama Ebby, who had been watching everything from across the compound with sad eyes and a full heart. Mama Ebby gave what she could, but it was not enough. The landlord gave Flora 1 week. 1 week to find the money or leave. Flora sat down that night and wrote a letter to Festus. She did not know if he would read it, but her hands needed to do something honest. So she wrote. She told him about the rent. She told him about her health. She told him about the silence, how it followed her from room to room now, how she ate alone and prayed alone, and woke up in the night reaching for something she could not name. She told him she was not asking for much, just enough to stay in the only place she still called home. She gave the letter to a bus driver who traveled that route. She was not sure it would reach him. It did. Festus read it on a Monday morning, sitting in his glass-walled office with a cup of coffee in his hand. He read it once, then he folded it and put it in his desk drawer. He told himself he would deal with it later. He had a presentation that morning. He had a client call in the afternoon. He had dinner with Thompson's family in the evening. Later never came. Flora was removed from the room on a Friday. The landlord, who had once respected her because she always paid, stood at the door with 2 young men while Flora packed what little she owned into an old bag. The neighbors watched. Some of them helped her carry things. Old Mama Ebi cried openly. A few of the children from the compound followed Flora to the gate, unsure what was happening, only knowing something very wrong. Flora walked out of that gate with her bag on her shoulder and nowhere to go. Now, if you are watching this right now and you have a mother who is still alive, a mother who is still waiting for your call, a mother who is counting on you, this is your sign. Do not wait until it is too late. And if this story is already hitting you somewhere deep, subscribe right now, because what happens next to Flora will change everything. We are not done. Flora found temporary shelter with a distant relative 3 streets away, a woman called Sonia, who had a small shop selling second-hand clothes. Sonia was not rich, but she was generous in the way that poor people often are, with space, with food, with time. She gave Flora a corner of her back room and a thin mattress and said nothing about payment. Flora helped in the shop. She arranged clothes, talked to customers, swept the floor. And in those quiet hours when business was slow and Sonia was dozing in her chair, Flora would sit outside and think. She thought about where she went wrong. She turned it over and over in her mind like a stone she could not put down. Had she spoiled him? Had she given too much? Had she made him believe that love was something owed and not earned? Or was the answer simpler and more painful, that the world had gotten into her son and rearranged him from the inside, and there was nothing she could have done differently? She did not find answers, but she found something else. She found anger. Not the loud, destructive kind of anger that burns everything down, including yourself, but the deep, quiet kind that settles in the chest and becomes iron. The kind that makes a woman sit up straight even when she is tired. The kind that makes her stop crying and start planning. She began to pray differently. Not the desperate prayers of a woman begging for mercy, but the focused prayers of a woman who has finally decided to stop waiting to be saved and start doing the saving herself. She started asking Sonia questions about the market, about suppliers, about which goods moved fast. She started waking up earlier than anyone in the house. She borrowed a small amount from Sonia, enough to buy a tray of goods, and she went to the market before sunrise. She sold second-hand shoes. It was not glamorous, it was not comfortable, but Flora stood in that market like a woman who had something to prove, not to the market, not to the neighbors, not even to Festus, to herself. And day by day, she sold, and day by day, she saved, and day by day, the iron inside her chest grew stronger. Nobody noticed. Nobody was watching Flora. The world had moved on from her, or so it thought. But here is the thing about women who have been pushed to the ground and still choose to arise. The world never sees them coming, not until it is too late.
12 months after Flora walked out of that compound with her bag on her shoulder, something shifted in the city. Thompson's company, the company that had made Festus rich, the company that had dressed him in fine clothes and given him a glass-walled office with his name on the door, collapsed. Not slowly, not quietly. It collapsed the way corrupt things collapse, suddenly, loudly, and with people running in every direction trying to save what they could. It turned out that Thompson had been running several illegal transactions through the company, money that was not his, contracts that had been falsified, payments that existed only on paper. And when the government came in and the auditors arrived and the bank accounts were frozen, everything came apart in a single week. Festus had not known everything, but he had known enough. He had signed documents he should not have signed. He had looked away from things he should have questioned. He had chosen comfort over conscience, and when the time came, there was no one to stand between him and the consequences. His account was frozen. His apartment lease was terminated. His name, which had once appeared on a small plate beside an office door, now appeared on a list of persons under financial investigation. The girlfriend left. She left quietly, the way people who were never really there leave, without drama, without explanation, just suddenly absent, like a shadow when the sun disappears. The new friends scattered. Thompson himself had been arrested. The other colleagues were busy protecting their own necks. Nobody called Festus to check on him. Nobody offered their spare room. Nobody showed up. He moved into a single room in a boys' quarters on the outskirts of the city. He had some savings, not much, because he had been spending as fast as the money came in. He had no job, no connections that still answered his calls, and a name that now carried his stain. For the first time in years, Festus sat in a quiet room with nothing around him but the choices he had made. And they were heavy. He thought about his mother. He thought about her the way you think about something you lost before you understood its value, with a sinking, hollow feeling that lives somewhere between regret and shame and grief. He remembered her hands. He remembered her voice. He remembered the letter she had written him, the letter he had put in a drawer and left unopened in his heart. He tried to call her old number. It was switched off. He asked a neighbor from the old compound. They told him she had been evicted. They did not know where she had gone. Festus felt something collapsed inside him that had nothing to do with Thompson or the government or frozen bank accounts. It was the kind of collapse that only happens when you realize you have hurt someone who only ever loved you and now you do not even know where to find them to apologize. He looked for her for 3 weeks. He went to the old compound. He spoke to Mama Ebi, who looked at him for a long moment with eyes that carried everything: sadness, disappointment, and something close to pity. She told him what she knew. She gave him a name, Sonia, and a direction. Festus went there on a Thursday afternoon. What he found stopped him completely. The shop was not what he expected. It was not the small, struggling stall of a woman barely surviving. It was a proper shop, not large, but organized, clean, with a hand-painted sign above the door and goods arranged with care. A woman sat outside on a wooden stool, talking to a customer with calm, confident eyes. It took him a second to recognize her, because Flora did not look the same. She was thinner, yes, but there was something else, a stillness in the way she held herself that had not been there before. Or maybe it had always been there and he had never paid enough attention to see it. Her wrapper was clean and pressed. Her eyes, when they lifted and found him standing at the edge of the street, were not the eyes of a desperate woman waiting to be rescued. They were clear, and in them he could read something that hit him harder than any word could. She had moved on. Not from him entirely, not from the love. You cannot switch off a mother's love, not even with the worst behavior. But she had moved on from needing him, from waiting for him, from building her hope on a son who had shown her plainly and painfully that he had chosen something else. Festus stood there for a moment, unable to move. Flora looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then she turned back to her customer. He came back the next day, and the day after that. Each time, Flora was there, walking, talking, moving with the quiet purpose of a woman who had found herself again. Each time, Festus came and stood near the shop, unsure what to do with his hands, unsure what words were big enough for what he had done. On the 4th day, Flora spoke first. Festus. Just his name. Not cold, not warm, just real. He walked to where she was sitting. He did not try to explain himself immediately, maybe because he knew that some things cannot be explained, only lived with. He sat down on the small bench she pointed to, and for a while neither of them said anything. The street carried on around them. Motorcycles passed, children ran, the market noise floated over from 2 streets away, like music from another world. Then Festus spoke. He did not give excuses. He had made that decision on the walkover. No excuses, no blaming the money, no blaming Thompson, no blaming the city or the pressure or the pace of things. Just the truth. Plain and ugly and his. He said, "Mama, I abandoned you. I had the means to take care of you and I chose not to. I read your letter and I put it away like it was something I could deal with later. I let them take your room. I let you carry what I should have been carrying. And I am not here to ask you to forgive me quickly, because I do not deserve quick forgiveness. I am here because you are my mother, and I have been a fool, and I am sorry. I am deeply, completely sorry." Flora did not cry. She had already done that crying, in the dark, months ago, on a mat in Sonia's back room when nobody was watching. That grief had already passed through her. What was left was something cleaner. She looked at her son, really looked at him, and she saw what he was now. Not the man in the fine clothes, not the man with the glass office, just Festus, her son, broken, humbled, and for the first time in a long time, honest. She said, "Do you know what it felt like?" He shook his head. She said, "It felt like dying while still being alive. Every day, I woke up in that room and I knew my son was somewhere in this city doing well, and I was not even worth a phone call. Do you know what that does to a woman? To a mother?" Festus looked down at his hands. "I do not know," he said quietly, "but I want to understand, if you will let me." Flora was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "You see this shop?" He looked up. "I built this with my own hands from nothing. I was thrown out with a bag and nowhere to go, and I built this. Not because I had help, not because someone came to rescue me, because I had no other choice, and because I refused to let what you did to me become the end of my story." She let that settle between them. Then she said, "I do not need you to save me, Festus. Those days are gone. But if you want to be my son, a real son, not just someone who sends money when he is feeling guilty, then you will have to show me. Not with words, with your life, with how you treat people, with who you choose to be when things are going well and nobody is watching you fall." Festus felt his chest tighten with something that was not quite pain and not quite relief. It was the feeling of being seen clearly by someone who knew you at your worst and was still choosing to leave the door open. Not wide open, just a crack, but it was enough. In the weeks that followed, Festus got a small job through an old contact. Not glamorous, not the kind of work that got you a glass office. Manual coordination work for a logistics firm. He showed up every day. He worked quietly. He kept his head down and did not complain. Every Saturday, without fail, he came to the shop. Not to give advice, not to take over. He would sit near the entrance, help carry things when heavy deliveries came, sweep the front of the shop, chat with customers when Flora was busy. Sometimes they talked properly about the past, about what they both needed to say, slowly and carefully, the way you approach a wound you are trying to clean without causing more damage. Flora watched him. She watched the way he moved, the things he said, the small choices he made when he thought nobody was paying attention. This was how mothers test their sons, not with big dramatic moments, but with the quiet accumulation of ordinary days. And slowly, like morning after a long night, something began to grow back. Not the same thing that had been there before. You cannot rebuild the same house on ground that has shifted, but something different. Something that had been tested and survived the fire. Something with roots that went deeper now because they had been broken and had grown back stronger. Flora expanded the shop. She got a small loan from a cooperative she had joined through Sonia's network. She moved into her own space. 2 rooms, clean and modest, but fully hers. She paid her own rent. She cooked her own food. She slept in peace. One evening, Festus came to help her arrange new stock. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence that has warmth in it, that does not need filling. Then Flora stopped and looked at her son. She said, "Festus." He looked up. She said, "You know what I always used to pray for you when you were small? I used to ask God not just to make you rich. I used to ask him to make you good. Because a good man who is poor will always find his way up. But a rich man who is not good," she paused, "he will always find his way down." Festus looked at his mother, at her hands, at her eyes, at the quiet dignity she wore like a garment that wealth could never buy. He said, "I know, Mama, I know that now." She nodded once, and then she handed him a box to carry, and they went back to work. That night, when Flora sat by her window in her own room, her own window, her own room, paid for by her own hands, she looked out at the city lights and she felt something she had not felt in a long time: peace. Not the peace of giving up, not the peace of being numb, but the peace of a woman who went through the fire, who was abandoned in the valley, who came out with nothing but her will and her faith, and who came out on the other side still standing, still whole, still herself. She had not waited for her son to rescue her. She had rescued herself. And in doing so, she had become the kind of mother her son could actually learn from, not just depend on, but genuinely admire. The world had watched Festus rise and fall and not said a word, but it had also watched Flora fall and rise. And that story, that quieter, harder, truer story, was the one that mattered. If this story touched you, please subscribe to this channel right now and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today.